In the end, it all comes down to Ziti. That was the essence of the government's closing pitch to jurors in its sprawling corruption case against Joseph Percoco, formerly one of Gov. Andrew M. Cuomo's top aides and closest friends, now accused of taking more than $300,000 in bribes from 3 executives in pursuit of state contracts. The bribes were codenamed Ziti, a reference to the mafia drama The Sopranos, and federal prosecutors seemed to relish Mr. Percoco's use of the term. In closing arguments on Tuesday, a prosecutor, David Joe, cited emails from Mr. Percoco to Todd R. Howe, a lobbyist with connections to the executives, in which Mr. Joe said Mr. Percoco was begging, requesting, demanding Ziti. "Where the hell is the Ziti? I have no Ziti," Mr. Joe said, quoting from emails Mr. Percoco sent from his private AOL account, adding that jurors should know exactly what Joe Percoco was demanding. He was demanding cash bribes, Mr. Joe said. The summations come during the 6th week of the trial in federal district court in Manhattan. Prosecutors have sought to show that Mr. Percoco, who served as Mr. Cuomo's executive deputy secretary, sold his influence in the administration after his personal expenses outstripped his income. He took that power that was entrusted to him, Mr. Joe said on Tuesday morning. And he corrupted it. But defense lawyers, in their own closing arguments, urged skepticism of the government's case, which they said hinged upon Mr. Howe, a felon with a history of lying, theft, and bad debts. Their point was boosted by the stunning mid-trial arrest of Mr. Howe, the government's star witness, after he admitted under cross-examination that he had tried to defraud his credit card company. Mr. Howe, who was cooperating with the government after pleading guilty to 8 felonies, had his bail revoked, and is being held in jail. On Tuesday, Mr. Joe tried to downplay Mr. Howe's importance. He said Mr. Howe's testimony was not the main evidence, and he asked the jurors to rely instead on a major paper trail of emails and bank and phone records. But Mr. Joe also admitted that Mr. Howe was not exactly a perfect witness. "Everyone in this room agrees that Todd Howe is a criminal," he said, before arguing that Mr. Howe's seedy history was further proof of Mr. Percoco's and his 3 co-defendants' corrupt intentions. "You know exactly why the defendants got in bed with Todd Howe," he added. "Because they knew exactly the kind of person Todd Howe was." Mr. Howe was central to the 2 schemes alleged by the government, involving Competitive Power Ventures, an energy company seeking to build a power plant in the Hudson Valley, and COR Development, an upstate developer seeking help with state contracts. In both cases, the government accused Mr. Howe of facilitating bribes to Mr. Percoco through payments to his wife, Lisa Toscano Percoco. In one instance, Ms. Toscano Percoco was paid nearly $300,000 over 3 years for what prosecutors called a low-show job with Competitive Power Ventures. "Ladies and gentlemen," Mr. Joe told jurors, "you have put more time into this trial than Lisa Percoco put into her $90,000 a year job." A second scheme involved some $35,000 in payments to Mr. Percoco from COR, the Syracuse area developer that has been a major donor to Mr. Cuomo and the beneficiary of several multimillion-dollar state contracts. The government alleges that Mr. Percoco did several favors for COR, including getting the state to waive a requirement that would have forced the company to hire union employees for a project. The alleged misdeeds, Mr. Joe said, drove at the very tenets of public service. "Think about how badly the defendants perverted state government," he said to the jurors, adding, that should disgust you. Despite Mr. Joe's efforts at damage control, defense lawyers in their summations homed in on Mr. Howe. Milton L. Williams Jr., a lawyer for Joseph Girardi, one of the COR executives on trial, asked jurors how they could rely on Mr. Howe when Mr. Howe could not even rely on himself. He can't even do the right thing by himself, Mr. Williams said, which he said was as easy as showing up, telling the truth, not getting in trouble, not getting arrested in the middle of the trial. The government was so enamored with Mr. Howe, Mr. Williams said, that it was willing to overlook his continued violations. Mr. Williams likened Mr. Howe to the government's dysfunctional but beloved family member, real charming, fun to be around but real unreliable, and you can't trust them. It's up to you to stop the damage of Todd Howe, he told the jury. Daniel M. Gittner, a lawyer for Peter Galbraith Kelly Jr., of Competitive Power Ventures, said the government had tried to whitewash Mr. Howe out of their closing arguments, even after they touted him in their openings. He appealed to jurors' emotions, calling Mr. Kelly a generous, soft-hearted man who, in hiring Mr. Percoco's wife, had only been trying to help a friend in need. Brythe, it's clear, wanted Joe to like him, Mr. Gittner said, using Mr. Kelly's nickname. Stephen Coffey, a lawyer for Stephen Aiello, another COR executive and the last co-defendant, cast Mr. Aiello as an innocent victim of Mr. Howe, whom he called the only person who was spinning this tangled web. Todd Howe is a walking, talking reasonable doubt, Mr. Coffey said. Mr. Percoco, a burly and sometimes brash presence during his days at Mr. Cuomo's side, did not testify in his own defense. Nor did Mr. Girardi, Mr. Aiello, or Mr. Kelly. Defense lawyers scored a small victory on Monday when the judge dismissed one of the counts against Mr. Percoco. Closing arguments, including from Mr. Percoco's lawyer, are expected to continue until Thursday, after which the jury will begin deliberations. Mr. Cuomo, a second-term Democrat facing re-election in November, has not commented on the trial, citing his respect for the legal process. Prosecutors have not accused him of any wrongdoing. But the depiction of Mr. Percoco's actions while he was working for, and closely alongside, Mr. Cuomo, including fishing trips, abusive banter, and, of course, his alleged affection for Ziti has not been flattering to Albany. This is not how honest and honorable public servants talk, Mr. Joe said. This is how criminals talk.